Friends, imagine an endless ocean, where the eye can only see the blue surface and the rippling waves. Silence all around, only the echo of the waves and the occasional cry of seabirds. No land in sight, no ship, no ray of hope. What would a person go through, alone in this vast ocean, for 133 days? Without enough water, without food, without companions, only the heat of the sun and the cold of the night. During the day, the sun would pour down fire from the sky, scorching the skin, and at night, the cold winds would rip at the bones. The waves of the ocean, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, inviting death every moment. The shadows of sharks hovered in the water, as if waiting for an opportunity. Each sip was precious, as if made of gold. Food. Only fish that were hard to catch, or birds that accidentally came close. Every morning, a question: will I survive today or not? Yet in that loneliness, the star-filled nights perhaps offered some courage, as if to say that the battle wasn't over yet. The depths of the ocean held a secret. Would it break a man, or strengthen his spirit? 133 days, each day a new battle, each moment a new test. Would you have been able to hold your nerve in such circumstances? This sea is not just a test of water, but also of human will. Friends, I'm talking about Paun Lim, stranded alone in the endless blue desert of the Atlantic Ocean. Imagine a 25-year-old young man, faced only by the sound of the waves, the heat of the sun, and the silence of the night. Paun Lim, a simple sailor from Hong Kong, was working as a steward on the British merchant navy ship SS Benlomond in 1942. He was working in the midst of war, away from his family, dreaming of a better life one day. But fate had other plans for him. On November 23, 1942, while sailing from Cape Town, South Africa, to Suriname, his ship was torpedoed by a German U-boat. 55 people were aboard: the captain, sailors, engineers, and stewards like Paun. Amidst flames and explosions, the ship sank into the depths of the ocean within minutes. Everyone except Paun drowned or disappeared. No one knows where the remaining 54 people went. Were they swallowed by the waves, or by sharks? At the last moment, Paun grabbed a wooden life raft, carrying only a few biscuits, a jug of water, and some chocolate. He was alone, without companions, without hope. The waves of the ocean challenged him every moment, as if asking, "How long will I last?" But Paun refused to give up. He caught fish, collected rainwater, and saved himself from sharks. His courage and intelligence kept him alive for 133 days. What was the strength that gave him the courage to wake up every morning? Did the sea send him a mysterious message? Or did the memories of his family keep him clinging to life? This is the story not just of one man, but of a human spirit that remains unbroken even in the most difficult circumstances. Friends, Paun Lim was born in 1918 on Hainan Island, China. Coming from a humble background, this boy was immersed in the sea and ships from childhood. China was experiencing turmoil and war at the time, so employment opportunities were limited. Paun Lim's parents wanted their son to study and live a good life, but circumstances forced him away from books and closer to the sea. As he grew up, he began working on ships. The life of a sailor is not easy, but it was this path that eventually earned him a place in the pages of history. In the third decade of the 20th century, tensions between China and Japan were increasing, and in this environment, Paun Lim joined British ships. World War II had begun in 1939. The world was divided into two parts: Germany and its allies on one side, and Britain, the United States, and their allies on the other. The sea played a vital role in this war. The Atlantic Ocean was constantly raging. German submarines, or U-boats, constantly targeted British and American ships. The fear of these submarines was so great that even merchant ships were escorted like weapons. It was under these circumstances that Paun Lim began working on the British ship SS Benlomond, which carried supplies and soldiers. The SS Benlomond was a sturdy vessel, but it was not immune to wartime dangers. It was November 1942. The ship was leaving South Africa and heading for America. There were about 50 people on board, Paun Lim among them. By that time, many ships had sunk at sea, but each time the sailors prayed for a safe journey. The day was calm, the waves were normal, and the sun's rays shone on the blue water. No one had any idea that everything was about to change in the next few moments. Around noon on November 23, 1942, a massive explosion suddenly rocked the ship. The explosion was so powerful that it shook the entire ship. Before anyone could comprehend the situation, a second explosion followed. People's screams echoed. The ship had been torpedoed by a German submarine. Panic gripped the ship. Everyone ran for their lives. Some rushed to the lifeboats, but the explosions were so powerful that many were swept away. The ship began to sink rapidly. Paun Lim immediately realized that if he delayed, he too would be lost forever in the deep, dark sea. He ran and grabbed a small wooden raft. This raft wasn't a large ship, but a small life raft kept for emergency use. It was approximately 2.4 meters long and 2.4 meters wide, with a small storage compartment in the middle. At that very moment, Paun Lim jumped to safety and climbed onto the raft. The scene before him was terrifying, people screaming all around, the sinking ship, and the depths of the sea. Within minutes, the SS Benlomond was swallowed by the waves. Climbing onto the raft, Paun Lim looked around. His heart was pounding. He knew he was completely alone. The rest of the ship had either drowned or were lost at sea. He had no companion, no help, and no hope of rescue. The raft contained only a few belongings, some biscuits, water bottles, a flashlight, 2 cans, some clothes, and a book. This was his entire wealth, with which he would face the coming days. But Paun Lim had no idea that this journey would not be of days, but of months. The days spent at sea had transformed Paun Lim into a different person. While he initially believed a ship would soon arrive and rescue him, that hope slowly faded. After a week or two, he realized this journey wouldn't be short. Every morning, he saw the first rays of the sun, vowing to live anew, and every night, listening to the sound of the waves in the darkness, he felt the fear of death. His body had weakened, but his eyes still held a spark of will to live. He was determined not to give up as long as he lived. He began to see the sea around him not as an enemy, but as a challenge. His stock of biscuits and water slowly depleted. Paun Lim decided he would find his livelihood from the sea itself. He fashioned a hook using raft parts and torch wire. Initially, he faced repeated failures. Sometimes he would wait for hours, but the fish wouldn't latch onto the hook. Sometimes the fish would eat the hook, but the rope would break. The pangs of hunger made him increasingly restless. But he didn't give up. After days of trying, his efforts finally paid off. A small fish caught on his hook, and he pulled it out. That day, he realized that if one sets his mind to it, even the impossible can be achieved. Instead of eating the fish raw, he tried drying it and cooking it. He had matches to light a fire, but limited wood. Burning any part of the raft was life-threatening. So, he resorted to using sunlight. He dried the fish on the raft and then ate it. This was his first real meal, prepared by himself. This meal not only satisfied his hunger, but also boosted his morale exponentially. Now, he began to believe he could fight the sea. Soon, he discovered another method, bird catching. Birds flying in the open sea would sometimes land on the raft. With his keen eyesight and patience, Paun Lim learned to catch these birds. He made a net out of cloth and slowly caught the birds that landed. He quenched his thirst by drinking their blood and satisfied his hunger by eating their flesh. Initially, this task wasn't easy, as the birds were very agile, but his dedication made it possible. When he caught his first bird, he felt a surge of energy. Now he felt he could defeat nature. The weather at sea was always the same. Sometimes the sun would burn so much that his skin would burn, and sometimes it would rain continuously for days. Rain was also a blessing for him, as it provided him with fresh water. He learned to collect rainwater in containers and cups. Every drop was precious to him. Sometimes, he would taste the rain falling directly on the waves with his tongue, reveling in the joy of life. But stormy nights were the most terrifying. Sometimes the waves rose so high that it seemed the raft would capsize. In those moments, he clung tightly to the raft and prayed to God that he would see the next morning. Occasionally, the shadow of the ship would appear on the horizon. He would immediately try to signal by waving his clothes, lighting his flashlight, and shouting. His heart pounded, hoping that this journey might finally end. But each time the ship would drift away, and his cries would drown out the sound of the sea. He would despair, but the next moment he would gather himself. He thought, perhaps this isn't my destiny yet.
Il must faille tarder.
This play of hope and despair was the ultimate test of his mental strength. Gradually, his body adapted to this difficult life. He grew accustomed to less food, less water, and harsh conditions. His beard grew, his skin burned, and his limbs weakened. But his eyes still held the same spark that said, "I will not give up." Each day passed between new dangers and new hopes. The struggle was no longer just for food and water, but for mental victory. Days turned into weeks. By now, Paun Lim had realized that this journey would be in no way short. Every day at sea was like a direct fight with death. His body was steadily weakening. His face had sunken, his bones were exposed, and layers of salt had begun to accumulate on his skin. The harsh sunlight had burned his back and hands, leaving them black and cracked. But despite his physical weakness, his spirit grew stronger every day. He would tell himself, "If I'm still alive, it means I shouldn't give up yet." This thought would spur him on. Hunger had become a habit. He would occasionally find fish and birds, but daily food was impossible. Sometimes, he would go 2 days without food. At those times, his vision would darken, his head would spin, and his body would falter. But as soon as a fish or bird was caught in his hook or net, the sparkle would return to his eyes. Catching that prey, he seemed to remind himself that if man wishes, he can conquer even nature. For him, every meal had now become a symbol of victory. Thirst was also a major challenge. Rainwater was his greatest support. Sometimes he would spread his clothes so that he could squeeze out the drops that fell on him. When it didn't rain for a long time, his throat would become dry and his lips would crack. Sometimes he would taste seawater, but the salt would make him vomit. He knew that salt water would hasten his death. So he taught himself that no matter how thirsty he felt, he would not drink seawater. This self-control kept him alive. The mental pain was as terrible as the physical. Often, he would sit alone on the raft and cry for hours. He would miss his family. Images of his mother would flash before his eyes. He would hear his father's words, and childhood memories would flood back. He thought that perhaps he would never be able to return home. But every time he felt like he was breaking down, he would look up at the sky and gather himself. He was determined to survive until his last breath, no matter what the circumstances. Meanwhile, the sea tested him with further hardships. One night, a storm raged. The waves rose so high that the raft sometimes surged upwards, sometimes plunged into a deep abyss. The roar of the wind was deafening. At that moment, he thought everything was over. But he held on tightly to the raft's ropes and tied himself to them. He endured the storm all night under the open sky. When the sun rose in the morning and the sea calmed, he breathed a sigh of relief. His lips were chapped, his hands were blistered, and his entire body was exhausted, but there was a sense of satisfaction in his eyes that he had survived another night. Sometimes, planes would appear in the sky, and his heart would pound. He would wave his clothes, flash his flashlight, and wave his arms and legs to signal. But the planes would never see him. When the planes flew away, despair would burn in his heart. He wondered, why couldn't I escape, even though I was so close? But after a while, he would convince himself that this wasn't defeat, but a test. This thought prepared him to wait for the next opportunity. Gradually, he lost track of time. He had no idea how many days had passed. Only sunrise and sunset had become his clockwork. Sometimes it felt like weeks had passed, but in reality, he had been living for months. His beard had grown so long that his face was unrecognizable. His clothes were torn, and his body was covered in wounds. But his spirit remained strong. This spirit became his greatest strength. Each new day in Paun Lim's life brought a new challenge. The vast ocean surrounding him and the strong winds constantly reminded him how alone he was. Many days had passed, and his body was gradually weakening. His only food was the fish he caught using strange techniques he had devised. For water, he would sometimes wait for rain, and sometimes try to drink the salty seawater by boiling it lightly. This wasn't easy, as salty water makes the body thirstier. But Paun Lim used his wisdom and patience to find a solution to every problem. One day, the sun shone brightly. The heat intensified, nearly draining him of moisture. His lips were chapped, and his throat felt as dry as a thorn. He looked up at the sky and silently prayed to God for rain. Surprisingly, the very next day, dark clouds gathered in the sky. The sound of waves crashing on the sea surface began, and soon, drizzle began. Paun Lim spread his small tarpaulin and empty containers to collect as much water as possible. When some water had collected, he carefully drank it. That moment was like a lifeline for him. He felt as if the heavens had heard his call. Struggling with hunger and thirst, Paun Lim's greatest enemy was his loneliness. At night, when the stars shone in the sky, he would gaze at them for hours. He remembered how, as a child, he used to make up stories by looking at them. Now, those same stars brought him solace. Sometimes he would cry, remembering his family, but then he would convince himself that if he gave up, all his efforts would be in vain. Meanwhile, he developed a habit of fishing with even greater diligence. He devised a method for catching fish. He would make a hook from a small bone, tie it to a thread, and then lower it into the water. Sometimes, he wouldn't catch anything for hours, but as soon as he caught a fish, his face would light up. He would immediately clean the fish, dry it in the sun, and preserve its meat for long-term consumption. This was a testament to his wisdom. Paun Lim's struggle was no longer limited to just food and drink, but it was also essential for him to remain mentally strong. Sometimes he felt the struggle was endless, but then a voice within him would say, "You can win." That voice gave him the strength to live each day with renewed vigor. His body was weakening, but his mind and self-confidence were stronger than ever. Paun Lim had been floating at sea for weeks now, clinging to life. His face was sunburned, his body was becoming a skeleton, and deep hollows had formed under his eyes. But he still breathed. His fire to live hadn't yet been extinguished. That morning, like every other day, he sat on the raft, staring at the horizon. Suddenly, he caught sight of a large shape in the distance. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Yes, it was a ship. His heart began pounding so fast it felt like it would explode. The miracle he had been waiting for months was right there before him. He began waving his arms with all his might, taking off his clothes and waving them in the air, hoping someone would see him. His voice came out like a dry scream from his throat. "Help! Help!" But the roar of the sea and the distance prevented his voice from reaching the ship. Paun Lim refused to give up. He picked up the box on his small raft and tried to signal by reflecting sunlight onto it. He thought someone might notice the glow. He tried relentlessly for a while. The ship slowly appeared to be moving toward him. A surge of excitement surged within him. He believed his troubles were about to end. But fate seemed to be playing tricks on him again. Just as the ship was approaching him, it suddenly changed course and headed in another direction. Perhaps it hadn't seen the raft, or perhaps it thought it was just some floating log. Paun Lim's greatest hope shattered before his eyes. His throat choked, tears welled up. After months of suffering, when he had seen the support of life, that support suddenly vanished. At that moment, a deep despair gripped him. He thought, perhaps it's impossible for me to escape now. If even the ships can't see me, who will? He closed his eyes for a moment and imagined death. But then a voice came from somewhere deep within him. "Why are you still alive? Because you don't have to give up yet." Paun Lim wiped away his tears and took a deep breath. He resolved to survive, no matter how long it took. Even after the ship had sailed away, he looked up at the sky and promised himself, "I won't give up. If one ship has come, another will come. And next time, I'll fight harder." That night, he was extremely tired. But instead of sleep, the ship that had passed before his eyes flashed before his eyes. This play of pain and hope was his greatest test. He convinced his heart that true victory would come only when he could overcome this endless ocean and return home alive. The months spent at sea had exhausted Paun Lim, but his will to live kept lifting him up each time. Now his body had become even weaker. His limbs were cracked, his skin was scorched by the sun and salt, and his bones were exposed. Hunger and thirst had become his greatest enemies. Sometimes he felt like he wouldn't be able to continue. But the fire within him still burned. Every day's struggle had become not just about survival, but a test of mental strength and patience. One day, as the sun was slowly setting, Paun Lim noticed a commotion in the water near his raft. At first, he thought it was a small fish, but gradually he realized it was a shark. A huge shark swam before his eyes. Its teeth gleamed, and its eyes glowed menacingly. Paun Lim's heart began pounding. His breathing became labored. He immediately gathered cans and tin cans from the raft and tried to distract the shark. The shark began to pound the raft repeatedly. Each time the waves brought the shark's jaws closer to the raft, Paun Lim felt as if this was his last moment. But he didn't give up. He threw tin cans from the raft into the water to distract the shark. The shark was confused for a moment, and Paun Lim tried to free himself by flailing his arms and legs. His body was trembling, but his spirit was still alive. The pressure of hunger and thirst was even more dangerous than the shark itself. Without fish and birds, he couldn't find any food. He decided that under no circumstances would he approach the shark, or else his life would be in danger. He further refined his small hook and net technique. Now, he would use the raft's edge and depths to catch fish. Sometimes he would wait for hours, but as soon as a fish was caught on the hook, his face would light up. At night, the sea became even more terrifying.
In the darkness, sharks and unknown creatures swam around the raft.
Paun Lim watched for every movement and tried to scare them away by shaking the raft. Many times, he caught birds in his net and ate their meat, but by far the greatest threat was the shark. One night, a shark came so close that Paun Lim realized the only way to escape. He shook the raft vigorously and made noises to distract the shark. With the help of the waves, he was able to gain some distance. Paun Lim's courage and presence of mind were what saved him during this dangerous time. His body was weakened by pain, hunger, and thirst, but his mind was constantly working. He realized that any mistake at sea was immediately punishable. Every step had to be taken carefully. He decided that he would now have to strategize each day to save his life. Paun Lim had lost track of time. He had no idea how many days had passed. Sometimes it felt like weeks, sometimes months. But his spirit still fought. The fear of sharks, hunger, and thirst had made him mentally stronger. Every night, every storm, and every challenge taught him that the human will to survive is amazing. The difference between day and night at sea had now virtually disappeared for Paun Lim. The harsh sunlight and the cold night winds weakened his body, but his mind worked feverishly to meet every challenge. He realized that only patience and ingenuity could keep him alive. He now thought anew each day, making the most of his small raft and available resources. The struggle with hunger and thirst had become a habit. Catching fish and trapping birds had become routine tasks for him. He had built himself a simple kitchen using small tin cans and ropes. The process of cooking and drying fish had become effortless. He knew that if he properly preserved his food, he could survive many more days at sea. These small daily successes kept his morale high. Paun Lim also built himself a protective cover from scraps of wood and tin from the edge of his raft. This cover protected him from sharks and other sea creatures. He wisely positioned his raft in a location where the waves weren't too strong, allowing him to easily catch fish. This experience taught him that not only strength, but also intelligence, is crucial to survival. Over time, Paun Lim also learned to maintain his mental balance. In his solitude, memories of his family and childhood sometimes haunted him. But now he used those memories in a positive, not negative way. He drew energy from them and reminded himself that he had to survive. This mental exercise became as important to him as food and water. Paun Lim also began to understand the patterns of ocean weather and fauna. He learned that fish were more active in the morning and late evening, and birds were more frequent during these times. He began using his small hook and net at those times. Sometimes he had to wait for hours, but whenever he caught a fish or bird, his joy knew no bounds. This success would motivate him to live every day. He further refined his technique for collecting rainwater. Using tin cans and cloth, he could store more water. This water not only quenched his thirst, but also helped him cook food. Every drop was precious to him, and he now understood the value of water. His body had weakened, but his thinking and understanding had become sharper than ever. After spending months at sea, Paun Lim also noticed that sometimes a ship or plane would appear on the horizon. He would immediately signal by shaking his raft and flashing a flashlight. Often his efforts were unsuccessful, but he never lost hope. It was important for him to understand that victory and defeat were only a matter of time. Every signal became a ray of hope for him. In 133 days, Paun lost 20 kilograms. He grew weak, but his mind remained sharp. He would hallucinate, thinking a ship was approaching, but it was only clouds. Loneliness was his greatest enemy. He would talk to himself, telling stories. He wondered what he would do if he survived. This mental strength kept him alive. Once he was so thirsty that he considered drinking seawater, but knew it would lead to death. He extracted juice from fish eyes and drank it. The sharks came again, but Paun drove them away. He repaired the raft because the wood was rotting. It was wartime, so he feared enemy ships. But Paun never gave up. He used to say, "Life is a battle." On April 5, 1943, 133 days later, 3 fishermen spotted the raft off the coast of Brazil. They were Brazilians, Joaquim, Manuel, and Francisco. They were amazed that someone so frail was still alive. They picked up Paun, gave him water, and carried him to shore. Paun could walk, but was very weak. He received treatment at the hospital. Doctors were astonished. How could someone survive so long without vitamins? Paun told his story. British King George VI awarded him the British Empire Medal. He went to America, but had immigration issues. He eventually settled in New York and took his last breath in 1991. Friends, Paun Lim's story teaches us that with willpower, anything is possible. 133 days, the record still stands. Friends, if you enjoyed this video, tell us in the comments if you could have survived such circumstances. Share and subscribe. See you in the next video.